Can I ask our guests to come in so we can begin the ceremonies? Bonjour, j'espère que vous êtes bien reposés. Est-ce qu'on peut appeler les gens qui sont dehors pour qu'ils puissent venir dans la salle, s'il vous plaît? Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, j'aimerais tout d'abord vous donner le bonjour, mais avant cela, j'aimerais dire combien nous sommes heureux d'être à Tanger, au Maroc, et remercier les autorités marocaines pour l'accueil chaleureux que nous avons reçu jusqu'à présent. Avant de commencer, j'aimerais demander à l'équipe de jouer d'abord l'hymne national du royaume marocain, qui sera suivi par l'hymne national de l'Union africaine. Et j'aimerais demander à tout le monde de se lever, s'il vous plaît. Je vous remercie. Maintenant, nous allons écouter l'hymne national de l'Union africaine. Let's applaud for the African national anthem. I'm always amazed every time that I go to a meeting how very few people know about the national anthem of the African Union. And one of the things that I always say is learn it because it's deep of meaning. I would like to welcome in this room the Commissioner for Economic and Development, Trade and Tourism and Minerals of the African Union, His Excellency Albert Muchanga, who just entered the room. Please welcome him. Your Excellencies, it is now my honor and privilege to welcome His Excellency Nasser Bourita, Minister of Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation, and Moroccan expatriates of the Kingdom of Morocco. May I ask that we welcome him, please.
Monsieur le Commissaire, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je suis honoré de vous accueillir au Maroc pour la tenue de cette première Policy Conference continentale de l'UA dans une ville emblématique du continent africain, Tanger, au croisement de l'Atlantique et de la Méditerranée. Je saisis ici l'occasion pour remercier le département aux affaires politiques, à la paix et à la sécurité de l'Union africaine d'avoir choisi la présidence du CPS par le Maroc pour tenir cet événement d'envergure. Ce choix constitue un gage de reconnaissance envers la contribution du Royaume du Maroc à la thématique, puisque Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI a érigé l'approche basée sur le nexus paix, sécurité et développement au cœur de notre engagement pour l'Afrique depuis le retour du Royaume à l'Union africaine. En effet, l'importance que revêt ce nexus dans les grilles de lecture du Maroc s'établit à 3 niveaux structurants. D'abord au niveau de la vision éclairée de Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI, qui avait affirmé dans son discours à l'occasion du 29e sommet des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union africaine que, et je cite, « L'Afrique n'a plus besoin de slogans idéologiques, elle a besoin d'actions concrètes et résolues dans les domaines de la paix, de la sécurité et du développement humain. » Fin de citation. Ensuite, au niveau de notre institution panafricaine, où le Maroc, dès son premier mandat au sein du CPS, entre 2018 et 2020, avait veillé à inscrire le triple nexus à l'ordre du jour des travaux de ce Conseil. Le Royaume, à l'occasion de sa présidence du Conseil en décembre 2019 sur le nexus paix, sécurité et développement, avait souligné la nécessité d'une approche intégrée et globale pour appréhender le lien entre la paix, la sécurité et le développement en tant qu'outil permettant d'atténuer la perpétuation des conflits violents et la fragmentation de la société. Enfin, au niveau international, en plaidant au sein des plateformes multilatérales et particulièrement au sein de l'ONU, à factoriser les besoins africains et les réalités africaines dans toute initiative visant la paix, la sécurité et le développement du continent dans une démarche partenariale et non d'assistance. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, la conjoncture actuelle rappelle avec acuité la centralité du nexus paix, sécurité, développement dans toutes les considérations visant notre continent. Elle invite également à l'interrogation et à l'évaluation lucide des réalisations et acquis engrangés dans la mise en œuvre des initiatives visant la paix, la sécurité et le développement. Alors que la dernière décennie a été marquée par la prolifération des initiatives pour l'Afrique, les répercussions positives de ces engagements tardent à se faire sentir. À l'aune des chocs exogènes, aussi brutaux qu'imprévisibles, l'Afrique continue d'être cernée de toutes parts, comme en atteste ce bilan qui pousse à bien des égards à la pondération et à la sobriété des élans enthousiastes. Premièrement, La prévalence de la violence liée à l'extrémisme et à la radicalisation en Afrique a été multipliée par 17 depuis 2009, faisant ainsi du continent la région la plus touchée par le terrorisme. Deuxièmement, à l'échelle du globe, 8 sur les 18 pays qui ont enregistré une détérioration fulgurante de la situation sécuritaire entre 2020 et 2021 se trouvent en Afrique, soit 44%. Troisièmement, le coût humain du terrorisme a atteint des niveaux records avec une multiplication par 10 du nombre de décès entre 2007 et 2021. Le coût économique de ce fléau a été multiplié par 9 depuis 2007. L'impact économique du terrorisme en Afrique s'élève pour sa part à 171 milliards de dollars sur les 10 dernières années. Enfin, la précarité sur le continent a atteint des niveaux records avec 137 millions d'Africains en situation d'insécurité alimentaire aiguë en 2022, soit une multiplication par 3 depuis 2018. Environ 500 millions d'Africains vivent sous le seuil de la pauvreté. Les réseaux criminels, terroristes et séparatistes exploitent cette précarité pour endoctriner, recruter et nuire. En moyenne, la croissance annuelle dans les pays en conflit intense est inférieure d'environ 2,5% en comparaison avec la même croissance dans des pays stables. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, si la corrélation entre les questions de paix et de sécurité d'une part et le développement de l'autre constitue un socle sur lequel doit se fonder toute approche visant à prévenir les conflits et construire une paix durable en Afrique, les moyens menant à la traduction concrète et pérenne de cette corrélation doivent occuper tout autant une place de choix dans nos considérations de politique publique et continentale. À cet égard, notre engagement à relever les défis sécuritaires qui sont multiples et de nature complexe et multidimensionnelle doit se baser sur des approches nouvelles qui permettent d'anticiper et intervenir au lieu de constater et réagir. Le Maroc estime que le temps et l'ordre de l'action devraient inviter plus de confiance en nos capacités africaines collectives pour relever nos propres défis et avancer de l'avant. Permettez-moi à cet égard de rappeler l'appel royal qui est resté célèbre, et je cite, « L'Afrique doit faire confiance à l'Afrique ». C'est bien cette confiance que nous estimons fait défaut aux efforts pour la paix, la sécurité et le développement du continent, pour ainsi débloquer son potentiel d'intégration continentale et mondiale. Car, qui dit confiance, dit partenariat d'égal à égal, affranchi de tous les relents de prédation et d'influence orientée vers le profit. Qui dit confiance, dit solidarité active, au-delà de l'intérêt immédiat et pour une construction panafricaine qui requiert un engagement sincère et une mutualisation des moyens au service des populations africaines. Enfin, qui dit confiance, dit centralité de la dimension humaine à travers une coopération concrète tournée vers et tournant autour des populations. Cette confiance constitue la clé de voûte pour mettre en route tous les projets fédérateurs de l'Afrique visant le développement et l'intégration de notre espace continental. C'est pour marquer cette confiance que le Maroc s'est engagé résolument et sous le leadership de Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI à partager avec les pays africains, le disieront, nos 2 décennies d'expérience dans la mise en œuvre d'une stratégie multidimensionnelle qui nous a permis d'allier sécurité nationale, développement humain et un poids économique de taille au niveau continental. Excellences, mesdames et messieurs, les panels prévus dans le programme de cette conférence aborderont des questions qui visent à tarauder nos esprits afin d'inciter une réflexion sérieuse et tracer des pistes concrètes pour une coémergence africaine. Ces panels sont à juste titre l'occasion d'adopter une nouvelle approche basée sur le triptyque paix, sécurité et développement dans le but de promouvoir la sécurité humaine dans toute sa globalité et qui comprend la sécurité alimentaire, sanitaire, sociale, économique et environnementale et qui se manifeste au niveau personnel, communautaire, national, régional et continental. Si l'Union africaine a investi tant d'efforts à définir des stratégies d'action pertinentes qui permettront à notre continent de tirer profit de ses énormes potentialités, la réalisation des aspirations continentales nécessitera autant plus d'engagement pour faire face aux défis complexes, actuels et émergents. C'est dans la droite lignée de ces considérations que le Maroc réitère son engagement pour une réorientation des efforts pour infuser davantage le triple nexus au sein de notre architecture institutionnelle en mettant en avant les quelques pistes de réflexion suivantes. Premièrement, en considérant sérieusement l'idée de mettre en place un fonds de l'UA pour le développement, à l'instar du Fonds pour la paix, dédié à financer l'action collective africaine en matière de développement socio-économique et humain. Deuxièmement, en explorant les pistes et mécanismes susceptibles de renforcer les synergies et la coordination entre les différents organes en charge du développement durable, de la paix et de la sécurité et de la gouvernance en Afrique, plus singulièrement entre l'architecture africaine de paix et de sécurité, l'architecture africaine de gouvernance, l'ODA, NEPAD et la BAD. Troisièmement, par l'instauration de la continuité de cette Policy Conference en l'institutionnalisant en tant que processus de Tanger, qui impliquera toutes les parties prenantes, y compris le secteur privé, dans la création d'un momentum positif en faveur de la stabilité et de l'essor du continent. L'objectif sera aussi d'élaborer des données fiables sur la mise en place du triptyque paix, sécurité et développement dans la concrétisation de l'agenda 2063 et des ODD. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, je demeure convaincu que vos délibérations durant les 3 jours de cette conférence permettront de mieux éclairer et de proposer des voies à suivre dans la formulation des politiques continentales, régionales et nationales, afin que l'Afrique que nous voulons réformée, pacifique, intégrée et prospère s'approprie pleinement le nouveau paradigme stratégique du nexus paix, sécurité et développement. Je vous remercie.
It is now my distinct honor to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Abel Muchanga, Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism and Industry and Minerals of the African Union Commission. Commissioner, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, the Director of Ceremony. The Honorable Minister who just made his very important statement. Your Excellencies who are in this room, as well as all the participants in this policy conference, and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by greeting each and every one of you, as well as register my extreme happiness that you have been able to come to this important policy conference. And before I proceed any further, I would like to register our profound appreciation to His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the people and the government of the Kingdom of Morocco for the warm reception and gracious and equally boundless hospitality that has been accorded to us since our arrival in this beautiful port city of Tangier. This is a magical site where we see the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean become one body of water. I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us. I speak on behalf of all of us when I say that we look forward to exploring the city and its beautiful shores. If you don't want to explore the city, may you raise your hand. If you want to explore the city, can you clap? Thank you very much. Ambassador, you got the message. We look forward to exploring the city. Furthermore, we have been accorded highly convenient and conducive facilities for our policy conference. When we take into account the fact that Morocco this month is chairing the African Union Peace and Security Council, this turns out as a distinctive mark of effective leadership. Once again, thank you and congratulations, Your Majesty the King, the people and government of the Kingdom of Morocco for hosting this policy conference. His Excellency Dr. Musa Faki Mohammed, the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and my brother, Ambassador Bankole Adioye, the Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, could not be with us today. And this is because they are involved in peace negotiations in South Africa on the situation in Ethiopia. I will be, in a spirit of teamwork, be representing both of them, in addition to attending to my own responsibilities in this conference. So I'll be in this policy conference right up to the end. The African Union Policy Conference on promoting the peace and security and development nexus is distinct and timely for three key reasons. First and foremost, its focus on the interlinkages among peace, security, and sustainable development, and the implications on realizing the African Union vision of, and I quote, creating an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa driven by its own citizens, end of quote. Secondly, Africa has the highest number of issues in the United Nations Security Council. And thirdly, also Africa has the highest number of least developed countries, making the continent the poorest region in the world. This notwithstanding, Africa's development, peace and security, and economic integration landscape is populated with some achievements. We can in particular point out periodic elections aimed at promoting democracy, as well as cooperation among the African Union, regional economic communities, the regional mechanisms to address complex security challenges of the continent. And as we meet today, we see that the world is facing grave challenges. The ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict has ushered in a new era of grave danger and uncertainty. The spillover at the economic level, a disruption of food and energy supplies, inflation, and looming recessions in many countries, as well as possibilities of housing bubbles. Climate change is generating temperature rises that are increasing, also becoming a grave danger to our common future. Climate change generates heat waves flooding, droughts, as well as famine. And many parties are now saying we should also now be talking of climate security, other than other dimensions of security. Still on the challenges that we face across Africa, many of our countries are confronting external debt burdens that are proving to be unsustainable. Still, for Africa, the political peace and security levels, there are also the challenges of the surgence of unconstitutional changes of governments, varying intensities of armed conflicts, popular uprisings, violent confrontation, and violent extremism. And at the level of economic integration, the disruptive tendencies of armed conflicts can adversely amend implementation of the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area. In many fora, I've also emphasized that Africa is a young continent whose population has a median age of 19 years. These young people want and deserve decent opportunities for their personal advancement. Denied such opportunities, social and political tensions can emerge. It is against this background that in 2013, the Assembly of the African Union Heads of State and Government adopted Silencing the Guns as one of the flagship projects of the African Union Agenda 2063. It is still being implemented, and this policy conference is part of the process of its implementation. In order to champion sustainable development in Africa, anchored on productive transformation, the African Union Heads of State and Government decided to convene an extraordinary session on industrialization, economic diversification, and the African Continental Free Trade Area on the 25th of November this year in Niamey, Niger. The extraordinary session will be preceded by the Africa Industrialization Week, starting on the 20th of November 2022. The Niamey extraordinary session comes against the background that for Africa to prosper, we need to industrialize. We need to diversify our economies, and also we need to foster deeper continental economic integration. The African industrialization drive must, among others, be driven by skills development, productivity improvement, industrial research and development, as well as industrial design, complemented with the development of regional and continental value chains. Diversification is required because the historical process of commodity production and export has resulted in us losing competitive advantage. For example, Africa's share of global trade has progressively declined from 6% in the 1970s to 2.7% today. Integration, and for that matter, deeper integration at the continental level is required to create a large and more attractive market space. The African Continental Free Trade Area is a starting point in this process. Let me at this stage say that as we meet today, what is clear is that without peace, security, and stability, sustainable development in Africa is not possible for a number of reasons. The first one is that resources, both human and financial, are diverted from sustainable development programming to fighting and humanitarian assistance that emerge from displacement of people as a result of those conflicts. The second one is that in a violent conflict situation, the past gains of economic, social, and political progress are wiped out and buried in the rubble created by the violent conflicts. Transforming that rubble into new towers of prosperity is an expensive venture that is best avoided. Clearly, there can be no sustainable development without peace. The corollary also holds. There can be no peace without sustainable development. What then are my expectations of you in this Pulse conference? My first expectation is that this policy conference will provide a platform to share insights into peace, resilience, and sustainable development issues, and reaffirm the relevance and critical role of economic integration in supporting Africa's peace and security efforts. Secondly, with robust dialogue and constructive engagement, it is also my expectation that we shall come up with practical measures that will minimize the risks of conflict, insecurity, and instability in our continent. From the foregoing, it is clear that by coming here today, we want a peaceful, secure, and stable Africa that delivers prosperity and not underdevelopment. In this stage, institutions in policy, programming, financing, banking, advocacy, research, cooperation, and several others are very important, and they are in this meeting. Let us therefore emerge from this meeting with a declaration and set of decisions which will create conditions for durable peace across all of Africa and substantively contribute to ushering in a new era of durable peace, security, stability, and above all, inclusive growth and sustainable development anchored on deeper economic integration. I'll end by saying that the triple nexus approach underscores that security is a public good that can no longer be decoupled from the continent's agenda for economic integration, as well as inclusive growth and sustainable development. In this respect, at the level of the African Union Commission, the two departments for political affairs, peace and security on one hand, and the Department of Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry, and Minerals on the other hand, should, as a follow-up to this policy conference, enhance collaboration and build lasting synergies in the execution of their mandates, and the process ensure that the triple nexus approach grows with a dynamism of its own. I'll end here and thank each and every one of you for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. It is my distinct honor now to invite our technical team to play the video from Her Excellency Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, who wanted to be here but could not make it.
Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you.
Dear colleagues, peace and development go hand in hand. There is no peace without development, and no development without peace. Conflict and insecurity make sustainable development impossible, and a lack of sustainable, inclusive development contributes to rising social tensions and unrest. Today's cascading and compounding crises show the urgent need for a joined-up approach. The impacts of the climate crises and the COVID-19 pandemic have been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, contributing to spiraling costs for food, energy, and finance. Inequalities are widening as a cost of living crisis takes hold. In some countries, people have taken to the streets to protest against gender-based violence and continued discrimination against women. Many of our African countries are suffering under this burden. Sustainable development, as guided by the 2030 Agenda and the African Union's Agenda 2063, is still our best chance to address the root causes of conflict and to ensure we leave no one behind. Getting the SDGs back on track requires coordinated action by peace, political, humanitarian, and development actors. We must build on existing initiatives that provide comprehensive integrated approaches, including the United Nations Integrated Strategy for the Sahel and the Lusaka Roadmap for silencing the guns in Africa. I urge all participants at this policy conference to reflect on practical measures to implement the development, humanitarian, peace-building nexus to deliver peace, security, and sustainable development everywhere in Africa. That includes strengthening joint conflict analysis, enhancing conflict prevention mechanisms, ensuring the meaningful participation of women in peace processes, and implementing joint initiatives to support humanitarian and political dialogue and development programs. I encourage you to think through specific openings for effective nexus planning on the African continent. For example, how can we creatively accelerate economic integration under the Continental Free Trade Area? How can we reform national agricultural policies to sustain food systems, protect livelihoods, and promote social cohesion? Investing in the nexus means investing in root causes and solutions to crises, investing in sustainable and inclusive development, ensuring that basic investments in livelihoods, jobs, health are protected and prioritized while a country navigates political crises or humanitarian emergencies. The United Nations is committed to investing in best practice methodologies and working with the African Union, member states, and all our partners to tackle these challenges and advance towards more peaceful, resilient, and just societies. I look forward to hearing your ideas and your proposals. I thank you.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, j'aimerais maintenant inviter Madame Assatou Diop Sélé, vice-présidente de la Banque mondiale, de la Banque africaine pour le développement, s'il vous plaît, qui représente le docteur Akinwani Adesina, président de la Banque africaine pour le développement. Madame, vous avez le...
Good morning. Excellency Nasser Bourita, Minister of Foreign Affairs, African Cooperation, and Moroccan expatriates of the Kingdom of Morocco. Excellency Albert Muchanga, Commissioner of the African Union. Excellency Catherine Samba Panza, former President of the Central African Republic. Excellency Mohamed Arouchi, Chairperson of the Peace and Security Council. Dr. Hanan Morsi, Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist of the United Nations Economic Commissions for Africa, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, all protocols observed. Good morning. On behalf of Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group, I would like to thank the African Union for inviting us to address this first policy conference on promoting the peace, security, and development nexus. What a timely, unique, and brilliant idea to bring together the security and development communities to discuss ways that we can create synergies along the peace, security, and development nexus. The conference is long overdue. Our heartfelt gratitude is also extended to the Kingdom of Morocco for hosting this meeting and the cordial reception. We are particularly indebted to His Majesty King Mohammed VI for his vision of Morocco and Africa and for being a champion of development and regional integration. A small anecdote. Many of the participants I met since I arrived yesterday, including some of my colleagues at the bank, used the high-speed train to connect from Casablanca to this beautiful city of Tanger. They told me about the stunning countryside, obviously, and how they marvel at the experience of traveling in Africa's first high-speed train. And I could not help myself to mention with much energy, enthusiasm, and pride that the African Development Bank contributed to the modernization of Morocco's railway sector. The trip from Casablanca to Tangier, this trip from Casablanca to Tangier is somewhat symbolic because it gives us a glimpse of the Africa we want, an integrated Africa with world-class infrastructure. The economic and security shocks experienced by Africa over the last few years have been devastating, both in their reach and their repercussions. If there was ever a time to reaffirm the relevance and critical role of security and its interrelation with development, that time is now. Because of the pandemic, Africa had the largest drop of GDP in 20 years. We lost $165 billion and over 30 million jobs. more than 26 million people sunk into extreme poverty. And now, just as we begin a painful recovery, we must contend with the food crisis caused by the Russia-Ukraine war. Prices of wheat, corn, and energy have surged. Lack of fertilizer is crippling local production and threatening Africa's food systems. The disruption could push a further 1.8 million people into poverty this year. On the security front, things are equally challenging. Our diagnostic study indicates that conflicts and violence have been increasing over the years, with spillover effects across regions. Over 250 million Africans are affected by fragility and conflict. In the last 20 years, more than 469,000 people, 469,000 Africans lost their lives due to conflict and human insecurity. The number of refugees and internally displaced persons reached 32 million in 2021. Regions such as the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, and northern Mozambique have become hotspots for organized violence and terrorism. Military expenditures reached an estimated $39 billion in 2021 alone, 16% higher than in 2011. High military expenditures reduce the capacity of countries to make critical investments in human capital, in infrastructure, and in energy. In agriculture, investments that are key and that are required to meet our development ambitions. In particular, to meet Agenda 2063 and the Sustainable Development Goals. The drivers of security, are very complex. They are multidimensional, and they are often interlinked. They evolved over time and include political, socio-economic, environmental, and regional factors. The disaster triangle of rural poverty, youth unemployment, and environmental degradation represent structural vulnerabilities that increase insecurity and conflict. These extreme deprivations, combined with inequality, exclusion, and marginalization of segments of society, are often among the root causes of conflict. Poor governance and weak state capacity are also important drivers of conflict, while corruption, lack of transparency and accountability, and mismanagement of resources lead to poor service delivery and increase inequality and grievances that can trigger violence. Security, as highlighted by Commissioner Muchanga in his speech, is a public good that cannot be disentangled from sustainable economic development. Addressing the root causes of insecurity, conflict, and violence is critical for inclusive growth. It is critical for sustainable development. Military interventions provide us with the proverbial 100 days. Within that 100 days, we must take actions to help rebuild the broken trust between communities. We must rehabilitate damaged infrastructure, improve livelihoods. We must provide jobs for vulnerable groups, especially women and the youth. And most importantly, we must work to create capable states and local institutions that can provide security, justice, and good livelihoods. However, the trend is slowly changing. There is a plethora of international development initiatives in conflict situations which are now attempting to better address the security development nexus, and this is encouraging. But critical questions in designing effective security and development-related assistance, those strategies remain unanswered. So there are profound questions that are difficult to answer, and there are obviously no one-size-fits-all solution. But all too often, actions are taken before meaningful debates are held on how we should go about addressing these issues. So this is why this policy conference is so timely and is so innovative. It should help us eliminate strategic and programmatic overlaps and better integrate and sequence our security and development interventions. So early this year, during the 35th Ordinary Session of the African Union Assembly, there was an endorsement of the Security Indexed Investment Bonds Initiative, conceptualized by the African Development Bank Group. This SIIB, as we call it, is a financial initiative that aims to mobilize scalable and flexible resources to address the root causes of insecurity, to enhance the capacities of states and rehabilitate communities and infrastructure adversely impacted by insecurity, among others. This SIB initiative aims to fill a critical gap in Africa's financing architecture. It is one of the first initiatives targeting the critical nexus between security or insecurity, development, and financing, and comes at a critical time as conflict incidence accelerates, financing constraints bites. It will help structure tailored financing and raise additional capital for investment that mitigate conflict, that promote peace, that build resilience, and that bolster security. And we will be working very closely with the African Union Commission, the regional economic communities, and other stakeholders to structure and operationalize this initiative. You will have the opportunity tomorrow to engage with us, or we will have the opportunity tomorrow to engage with you and review the progress made on the Security Indexed Investment Bond Initiative, and also hear from you. Excellencies, the African Development Bank Group will continue to play its role as Africa's premier catalyzer of development finance for regional integration, especially in infrastructure. We have invested over $44 billion in infrastructure in Africa, and actually we are the largest multilateral development bank financier of infrastructure on the continent. And from energy to transport, digital infrastructure, water, and sanitation, $44 billion over the past 6 years. So when the COVID crisis hit, we moved swiftly. We had a multi-billion-dollar program, crisis response facility, which capitalized on our experience during the Ebola crisis. A few months ago, after the start of the war in Ukraine, we launched a $1.5 billion facility, African Emergency Food Production Facility, to provide 20 million African smallholder farmers with certified seeds. And this initiative will deliver enough agriculture fertilizers to make it possible for farmers to rapidly produce tons of foods. To conclude, the pandemic, the food crisis, climate change, the prevailing security concerns have challenged the continent in ways that we did not expect. But looking further ahead, we believe that this crisis contains the seed for a large-scale reimagination of Africa's development and security systems. We are becoming better adept at integrating conflict-sensitive approaches into development assistance. Our strategies are becoming clearer and more effective in assessing local needs, setting priorities, allocating resources, but also establishing accountability. So we must continue to address strategic and programmatic overlaps between security and development efforts, and in common areas such as governance, reforming the security sector, and the establishment of the rule of law. In conclusion, Excellencies, the African Development Bank remains committed to working with the African Union, the RECs, development partners, governments, and the private sector to mobilize additional public and private sector resources needed to help Africa's development and regional challenges. Thank you.
Madam Vice President, let me take this opportunity actually to thank the African Development Bank for its support for this conference. Your contribution has been significant and we appreciate it. Let me now invite Her Excellency Dr. Hanan Morsi, Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist of the United Nations Commission for Africa.
Good morning. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. First, let me congratulate the African Union for hosting this important policy conference under the theme of promoting peace, security, and development nexus, the promise of regional integration, and for inviting us as the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa to be a partner in this important endeavor. And let me also thank the Kingdom of Morocco and the government for generous hosting of this important conference. The meeting could not have come at a more opportune time, as countries across the world reevaluate the way their supply chains are organized following the pandemic and the war in Ukraine. This is particularly important for Africa, as we have seen the exposure and vulnerability to the series of global shocks that the continent has faced. In this context, the successful implementation of the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement is critical. The agreement is the flagship project of the African Union Agenda 2063, which offers a vision for Africa to become more integrated, peaceful, and prosperous. ECA's latest assessment of the impact of the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement indicate that African GDP, output, welfare, and trade are expected to grow following successful implementation of the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement. And crucially, intra-African trade is foreseen to grow by 40% with the agreement in place compared to a situation in the absence of it. All main sectors are expected to actually benefit and substantially benefit from it. These ambitions are, however, threatened by a variety of the factors, not least which includes the conflicts currently underway in several regions in the continent, and the impact these upheavals have on lives, investments, and productive capacities. Disasters, including climate-induced disasters, are also a factor in this question. Over the last decade, almost 100 million people around the world has been forced to seek safety either within their own countries or in neighboring countries. 60% of the forcible displacements were hosted in low and middle income countries in Africa and the Middle East. And of the 10 countries hosting the most displaced people, 5 countries were in Africa. ECA has just completed a study on the triple nexus and trade towards a new agenda for Africa. The study, supported by empirical data, focuses on the implication for security and peace when viewed in the context of trade reforms, using the displacement of population as a proxy for the triple nexus, with the understanding that large-scale human displacement often occurs from a mixture of conflict, fragility, and vulnerability. The analysis shows that trade is relevant in countering fragility and promoting effective transitions from war to peace. Between 2010 and 2020, when conflicts intensified in most regions in Africa, including in the Sahel, several recurring factors were observed. These include armed conflict, environmental degradation, desertification, flooding, drought, ethnic tensions, local grievances, food insecurity, severe poverty, terrorist attacks, fragile government, and political instability. ECA's analysis provides a basis for informing the content, resource requirements, and sequencing of corrective measures needed in conflict zones and disaster areas, and which will be the subject of our deliberation over the next few days. But there is potentially another factor that has increasingly caught our attention, and it's the extent to which export-oriented economies in Africa that rely on export-oriented growth and commodity-linked investments mirror the peaks and troughs of global economic downturns and the pressure to plan for the recovery from conflicts and disasters. Our study shows that there is considerable variation across states in response to a conflict. When we examine the potential relationship between changes in trade and the proportion of internally displaced persons relative to the total population size of the states, we observed some developments which may suggest the tools that will be needed to actually address the challenges, such as trade openness, combined with income and the level of fragility. We also observed that regional integration scores don't play a major role. Higher income countries may experience less of an impact initially, but this may be countered by countries' levels of fragility. We also note that trade agreements can promote integrated economies and reduce conflict by creating disincentives among states and their actors due to the potential loss of property and other disruptions caused by conflict. But these disincentives need to be accompanied by incentives that foster intergroup cohesion, trust, and predictability of trade regulation. In other words, ECA's report is more than just a study which explores the trade implications of conflict. With the emerging evidence that trade enhances resilience at a national level, regional and global levels, the argument to integrate trade into the triple nexus are compelling. Development partners like the United Kingdom and European Union have signaled a willingness to address the underlying causes of conflict, including climate change and economic inequalities. In 2020, almost 45% of the EU's 900 million euros humanitarian budget was allocated for supporting long-term displaced populations and refugees in the Sahel, the Lake Chad Basin, and Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and South Sudan. Yet, this is a drop in the ocean in comparison to the triple nexus funding opportunity of $60 billion a year, based on the aid flows to 58 fragile countries, most of which are in Africa and Asia. The role of private sector financing and the modalities under which that could operate will hopefully be discussed during this conference. Excellencies, a trade-integrated triple nexus governance model that meets the needs of all actors in the development, humanitarian, and peace policy space will be needed. The 2030 Agenda of the United Nations for Sustainable Development gives us some common starting principles for tackling the many layers of exclusion that displaced people, especially women and girls, face. And external sources, such as the Aid for Trade mechanism, provides an example of how this model could be developed. The $400 million African Union Peace Fund, which has recently been reactivated, is a timely reminder of the homegrown initiatives which have developed, especially tailored to the continent's needs, which is very much welcome. In conclusion, although the ECA's study limits the geographic scope of displacement to region and states most impacted by conflict, the messages it sends to policymakers and the private sector are clear. There are ways to measure how conflict impacts trade, and the role of trade and triple nexus partners is essential in developing and implementing solutions that work to address this challenge. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanan Morsi. I would like to also recognize UNECA for its contribution to this conference. They supported us, and we are grateful. Thank you so very much. May I now invite our technical team to play the video of Her Excellency Ahuna Eziakonwa, Assistant Administrator and Director General for Africa of the United Nations Development Program. UNDP has been a partner throughout.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and partners, ladies and gentlemen.
Can you please hold a second?
Let me start by thanking the African Union Commission and our host, the government of the Kingdom of Morocco, for organizing this high-level dialogue. The next 3 days will provide an opportunity for us to take stock of Africa's journey towards economic integration, towards responsive and accountable institutions, and towards enduring peace. Africa's development journey is at an inflection point. On the one hand, many African countries are well on the way towards democratic consolidation and economic prosperity, with young and dynamic populations that are finding more opportunities to build their own futures. On the other hand, however, violent extremists continue to drive conflict across the continent. And data shows that violence against civilians has steadily increased since 2015. Sub-Saharan Africa is emerging as the epicenter of terrorist activity, recording nearly half of all terrorism-related deaths in 2021 alone. Distinguished participants, our collective effort to save generations from the scourge of war has never been more important. And I am pleased for UNDP to contribute to this high-level dialogue by fostering discussions on two important issues that are actually quite close to my heart. The first one is the particular situation of communities that are living in Africa's borderlands regions. Based on UNDP's direct interaction with these communities, we are seeing the critical role that regional integration can play as a driver for mobility, for labor diversification, and for a healthy cross-border social cohesion in Africa's borderlands. The second issue is a better understanding of complex political transitions in Africa. Based on an incoming primary research, UNDP seeks to provide more nuanced insights on the drivers of recent military coups to effectively support countries that are experiencing varying forms of complex transitions. Better understanding inspires new forms of responses. This is why UNDP is working with the African Union Commission in consultation with the UN system and other development partners to establish the Africa Facility to Support Inclusive Transitions. We call it AFSIT. Human security is a public good. And without this, the momentum that is generated by the AFCFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, and other AU regional integration initiatives will eventually wane. African Union member states have demonstrated strong political commitment to addressing the continent's peace, human security, and development challenges. These commitments, as outlined in the Accra Declaration, and which further are reiterated at the Malabo Heads of State Summit, resonate as a call for collective action. Without basic human security, peace remains impossible and elusive. And without peace, development is hindered. I wish all of you a fruitful meeting. Merci beaucoup. Shukran. And thank you all.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, merci. Donc, nous venons de clore la première session. Nous allons prendre la photo de famille qui sera dehors. Et j'aimerais inviter les gens du protocole pour guider nos invités pour prendre la photo de famille. Et nous allons commencer avec les VIP qui ont des badges rouges. Je pense que certains d'entre vous ont des badges rouges. Ils seront devant pour la photo de famille. Your Excellencies, we are going to take the group photo and it will be outside. So please follow our protocol who will be escorting you for the group photo. Thank you so very much. And then we shall be back for the next, the first session. Je vous remercie.